They like to conserve energy. They like to find eddies. So it was highly entertaining, whatever. Anyway, I was bored. I took pictures. So cardiac output is a type of flow. Cardiac output has the same units as flow. Amount, volume, per unit time. So already, are you seeing how we can change Ohm's law, that flow equals change in pressure over resistance? We can substitute cardiac output for flow. And we know cardiac output is predicated on heart rate and stroke volume. Isn't this fun? We're like recreating equations. We're recognizing that we can substitute different values. We can substitute stroke volume and heart rate multiplied together for Q. Characteristics of blood flow. Blood is going to flow in a what's called a laminate manner, laminar. Laminates are like layers of the blood. So the blood that is going along the vessel wall, that's going along the literal lining of the tunica intima, those red blood cells that are going along are going to experience drag. They're tumbling along. The next layer of blood, more internal towards the lumen, will be experiencing less drag. Finally, the blood that's in the most center of the lumen will have the least amount of drag, and therefore the fastest rate of flow. So we will see this parabolic effect. If you were in what we call affectionately in our house, if you were watching NetCar racing, NASCAR, call it NetCar. If you were actually driving those cars, where would you want to be in the pack? Okay, yes, good, Martha. In the front, of course. But where in the front? Do you want to be closest to the boards?
No.
No, why?
Because you have that traffic, and you hit the wall.
You get more opportunity to hit the wall, and when they do that, they spin out and they can go into the crowd, right? And take a few of the necks out. And that happens every once in a while. So the idea is the blood that's more in the center will have the fastest rate of flow. Less turbulence, less resistance. In letter A, you are seeing that blood will only flow if there's a pressure change along the length. We are not seeing any flow because there isn't any pressure difference. In letter C, you are seeing turbulent flow, swirling, eddies, bruits. And it's the turbulent flow that is going to cause sounds, as you will learn. So laminar flow is the best kind of flow. It will produce the least amount of shear stress on a blood vessel. Anytime a blood vessel does a sharp turn, for example, the descending abdominal aorta leading to the renal arteries, that's almost a 90-degree turn. And that blood coming down the descending abdominal aorta now has to shoot into those renal arteries. Those renal arteries experience a lot of shear stress. The physical movement of the blood making that sharp turn can wear on the endothelial lining. Where else can we have a sharp turn? That might create a lot of shear stress. Collagen fibers starting to protrude, platelets getting activated, starting to create a clot, coronary arteries. Coming off of the coronary arteries, the left side in particular, the left coronary artery comes off the ascending aorta and it gives off the anterior interventricular artery and then immediately turns into the circumflex. That short little segment experiences a lot of shear stress. You combine that with a person who has a high fatty diet, high cholesterol diet, they have the bad cholesterol, too much LDL, not enough HDL, then that means, do you know that your macrophages, if you have too much cholesterol, the LDL kind, your macrophages have receptors for them. And when your cholesterol levels go up, the endothelial lining in your blood vessels release signals to the macrophages saying, we need help. And the blood vessels become more permeable for the macrophages to live under the tunica intima, on top of the tunica media. And the macrophages, if they could talk, they would say, don't worry, blood vessels, we'll help you. We'll gobble up that LDL for you. And so they start phagocytizing the cholesterol from those low-density lipoproteins. But then it gets too much for them, and it accumulates, and cholesterol crystallizes. And so now you have macrophages that are creating these crystal fibers, and the plaque starts to develop. And it pushes on the tunica media, so it grows into the tunica media. But eventually, that plaque gets so big that fibroblasts try to encapsulate it. And they try and cover it with fibrous connective tissue. Eventually, the tunica media won't give anymore, and then that plaque starts to infringe in the lumen of the blood vessel. It might just make little bumpy waves. If you're talking about a blood vessel that now has these bumps in it from those atherosclerotic plaques building up, what will happen to laminar flow? You're going to get less laminar flow. You're going to get more turbulent flow, more shear stress, more collagen fibers exposing. Eventually, those platelets are going to come into contact. You've got the atherosclerotic plaque reducing the lumen of the blood vessel. Platelets being activated, clot formation, more and more and more occlusion. Heart attack waiting to happen. Perfect little storm. Isn't that cool? I mean, not if that's happening to you. Okay, so anyway, so laminar flow is silent, no sound associated with it. Turbulent flow is where we're going to hear murmurs or bruits. It's turbulent flow that allows us to measure a patient's systolic pressure. Tuesday class, you did that today, right? Were you able to hear your systolic pressures? Some of you had to leave the room and try it.
Pleasure.
And how is shear stress, a factor? This is showing you an aortic aneurysm, a descending aortic aneurysm. What happens with a lot of shear stress? You can have the tunica intima and the tunica media become weak, and the blood vessel will just keep expanding. What's a dissecting aneurysm? Well, you can actually have a break in the tunica intima. And now blood, instead of going through the lumen of the blood vessel, can go through the tunica intima and actually create a new channel in between the tunica media and the tunica intima. Now you've got blood flowing through the true lumen, but also blood going in between these tunics. And that's called a false lumen. Eventually, you can actually have that blood going into the false space, break right back through into the official true lumen. Now that is a dissecting aneurysm, and that is what killed John Ritter. That's the kind that he had. So you can have this aneurysm, and you can also see this yellow stuff. This is actually the macrophages underneath the tunica intima gobbling up that cholesterol and the LDL and creating these fatty streaks. It used to be that we could not detect that using our standard imaging. Our imaging has gotten good enough now, some companies, they can actually see these yellow streaks forming. And that means earlier preventative care for patients who might be having more of a tendency for atherosclerotic plaques. Okay, Tuesday class. Martha, this is where you're going to be having, oh yeah, I already did this, right? Your moment of, okay, check, I got it. Stephen Hales in the 1700s was trying to measure blood pressure in a horse. Now I have to tell you something. Scientists, when they don't have a lot of money, we're like artists and actors and actresses. We don't get a lot of money. We really don't get a lot of money for the work we do. As such, getting lab animals to do our experiments on can get a bit challenging. You don't have money to buy them. A lot of times, some of the earlier scientists would work on cadavers, of course, steal bodies from the graves. But if they needed live animals, they would oftentimes use their own pets, their own farm animals. So they used what they had. All right. In this unit and next unit, I'm going to tell you about Goldblatt's hypertension. And Goldblatt was a scientist who actually used his own dog for his experiments. Removed a kidney from his dog and then did experiments on the, you can live with one kidney. So the dog lived. Dog had a happy life, just was, subject to all these experiments. So we use our own animals or the neighbors. Anyway, it's so sad, actually.
Yeah.
We treat them humanely. And our little bunny rabbits that we use for antibodies, we feed them really well. When they start giving us good titer, yeah, we might have to take a glass tube to their medial campus and get blood from their eye, but we treat them well. All right, so Stephen Hales, he was doing an experiment with a horse. He inserted a large cannula into the common carotid of the horse, and he connected that cannula, large needle, to a rubber tube that then was connected to a glass column that was filled with mercury. And whenever the horse's heart contracted, the blood pressure increased and the column of mercury went higher. And he actually measured that in millimeters. And so that's why the units for blood pressure is millimeters of mercury. And when the horse's heart relaxed, the column of mercury went down to a more inferior level. It fell under the force of gravity. So that was diastolic pressure, again, labeled or with the units millimeters of mercury. Atmospheric pressure is also in millimeters of mercury. Do you have barometers? We have classic old mercury barometers that some of our state officials are saying we need to get rid of. This is the industry standard. This is what we use. So as the atmosphere is pushing on this fluid, it actually exerts a pressure on a column of mercury inside. More atmospheric pressure means the column rises more. When we say low pressure, then that means the column of mercury is dropping. So that's how barometers work. That's how our sphygmomanometers are working too. Oftentimes you might see millimeters of mercury switched out with another unit called torr. And they are technically not the same, and the word torr is being phased out. It was like a quirky science joke that I think it was some students at MIT that actually started it. Anyway, it's starting to be phased out, and it needs to be. It really is not a proper term to be used. So all blood vessels have a blood pressure. A blood pressure is a hydrostatic pressure. It means the force of blood on the vessel wall. It is an outward force. All blood vessels have blood in them. Therefore, that blood is exerting a pressure on the vessel wall. The blood vessels that are closest to the heart, the arteries, will experience the greatest blood pressure. They're closest to the pump. The blood vessels that are leading back to the heart, the veins, they're going to have less blood pressure, less pushing on the vessel wall. But all vessels have it. So why do we care about blood pressure? If you look at Ohm's law, it's the driving force to get blood flow. If you don't have a blood pressure, you don't get flow. What's the big deal with that? That means organs don't get perfused. That means they're not getting their nutrients. That means they're not getting their oxygen. They will become hypoxic, anoxic, and have an infarct. So, blood pressure, we care. Not just for too much, but also too little. Because too little blood pressure means not enough perfusion. So when the heart contracts and you get the stroke volume ejected into those elastic arteries and then muscular arteries, we want them to expand and then recoil. And they have the anatomy for that. They have the elastic fibers, either in their tunica media or arranged as sheets. So when the stroke volume is ejected and the vessels expand the most, that's the most hydrostatic pressure. That's your systolic pressure. That's your larger number. When the vessel recoils, it's going to do so through its elastic properties. And that's going to help push the blood further down the vasculature. You see, you still have blood flowing even when your heart is resting. This means your blood flows differently than how water flows in your house. When you turn on the faucet, you get water flowing. When you turn off the faucet, no water flowing. When the heart contracts, you get blood flowing. It's ejected out of the heart. The vessels expand, but when the heart is relaxing, the vessels recoil. And it's the recoil that maintains pressure on the blood. And as the recoil occurs, this helps drive the blood further down into the smaller arteries, to arterioles, to capillaries, to venules, to veins, to the inferior and superior vena cava. It's the recoil, the stored potential energy being harvested in the recoil to keep pushing the blood through the vessels.